Hello, and welcome to part 2 of Crime and Punishment. At least that's what you're going to be reading this week. So congratulations on having begun this novel and on finishing the first part. So it begins with him waking up after committing the murder. He doesn't really have the best capacity at that moment. You'll meet his friend who comes into the scene, and his eyesight here is refreshingly normal. And then you'll meet his sister's fiance, Peter Petrovich, who comes to pay him a visit. So we're going to start meeting these other characters, and it's a chance for us to think about foils again, which is going to be the concept of our creative analysis. If you're feeling lost at any time in this book, I actually love the Schmoop retellings. Schmoop is like the funnier cousin to Cliff's Notes. As a rule, I don't think you should read these before you read anything, of course, because it takes away all of the suspense of reading a novel. But after you finish it, I think it can be really nice to go back and consolidate the information that you think you have using one of these supports, and I think Schmoop is pretty funny. So I'm linking here a retelling of part 1, and there it is, shared with you all. It doesn't go into anything more than you read already. It's about a page and a half, and it'll give you confirmation that you're getting the big things taken care of as you're reading the novel. All right, so this week, we're going to think briefly about contrasting characters. The book is more than just Rodya or Raskolnikov. So the focus there is 1A and 1C. 1A is identifying the different perspectives and what that brings to the information that we're given. We're going to learn a lot about the same crime or the same experience through many characters' perspectives. And then 1C, explain the function of contrasting characters, which is another way of saying explore foils in the novel. Your creative analysis assignment will be to choose a pair of foils to discover. I'm going to present this concept here that is not from AP Lit, but it's more broad-reaching than that. It's that characters in novels are proxies for philosophical thought. So good writers, genius writers especially, like Dostoevsky, are going to use their characters to push out certain philosophies on seeing the world. They're going to imbue their characters with philosophical motives. They represent certain ways of thinking. When you read this novel, you should consider Dostoevsky to be kind of a philosopher himself. Certainly that's what he was regarded as being when he was writing in the heyday in Russia, when he was contemporary with some other really major thinkers, Marx and Hegel and Kant, these other writers that were in the century before him, pushing forth some progressive ideas. So Dostoevsky is going to comment on all of those through Crime and Punishment. Let's take a moment to pause and think about the historical context for Dostoevsky so that we can appreciate better what these characters are trying to say. How did Dostoevsky draw his characters to represent the personalities and philosophies of his community? I'm going to simplify this, but I think that the philosophy questions here are really good and worth your further study if you like philosophy. This is all clipped from something from Columbia College, Teachers College in New York, and it's just historical context for Crime and Punishment. So the burning question of Dostoevsky's day, arguably facing Russia even in the 20th and 21st centuries, remained, is Russia European or not? St. Petersburg, uniquely then, is at the fulcrum of that question because it's far west in Russia. It's right on the Baltic Sea, and right across the sea is Europe. So how much does Russia want to be Western, and how much does it want to be Slavic or Eastern? Let's say that, again, simplified, there are two rough camps in St. Petersburg in the writing of Dostoevsky. There are the Westernizers. That's the upper class. They spoke French, they wore London fashions, and they discussed these philosophies. I have a list here of ones that were really important in that city in that time. There was utopian socialism, which was not what they called it at the time, but it's the word that we use now to refer to the theories of Marx, the theories of Kant, and Hegel. We're going to talk about Hegel in a couple of weeks because he posits a theory of the Übermensch that becomes super important to Dostoevsky. There's also French ideal philosophers, Charles Fourier, Henri de Saint-Simon. They're all doing the same thing, which is trying to understand how you get a perfectly ethical society to exist. Unlike philosophers before that, who were more interested in the individual and the individual's nature, These theorists are wondering, what can we do to make society scientifically perfect, to make it work? Okay, so there's one huge body of philosophy that's pushing its way into St. Petersburg. And then you have utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, which is represented by characters like John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, argues that you should always do what is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. There's a famous example, you might have heard of it if you've ever studied utilitarianism. If you're operating a trolley and you pull a lever to avoid killing one person, you will certainly kill 100. Do you do it, or do you kill the one person? Utilitarianism says you definitely kill one person over 100. It's all about the greatest good for the greatest number of people, which is not the same as what Kant is arguing. He is more interested in virtue and how is it that you're going about making your decisions. The outcome is not as important. So there's lots of competing thoughts here. And then there's nihilism, which is coming through, most famously represented by Nietzsche, that there are no moral absolutes, that all of this is a construct, and that human beings are essentially lacking in meaning because there's no point to any of this. Oh my goodness, can you imagine living in a society that is actively debating these things? Those are the westernizers in St. Petersburg. And so you can imagine the taverns where they're having these heated conversations, and Raskolnikov at the center of those conversations, trying to understand what he thinks and who he is. And then, as if that were not enough, there is another camp. We'll call them the Slavophiles, the lovers of the Slavic culture. That represents Russia until this point, the local folk, the people, the serfs who had only been emancipated in 1861, and everything they came to represent. There was a lot of agrarian communities that were rooted in local folk traditions that did not have their root in these other philosophies. They had their root in living in these human communities for many hundreds or even thousands of years. They had a strong commitment to Christianity. There's a Christian orthodoxy at work in these local communities, and a romanticism, the ideal. How do we strive to be our own personal and individual ideals? Oh my goodness, so much for Raskolnikov, and so much for us. So if you're wondering how to make sense of Raskolnikov's monologues and thinking, it might help to see him as an embodiment of all of these things. He is a student of philosophy. He cares deeply about thinking. So he's thinking about each of these things all the time, and they don't coexist well. Now, let's take this for a moment and dial in to just one, and it's utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is what I think we can use as our first step into the philosophy of the novel, because in it we say the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It's a nice way to sum up the philosophy. Well, Raskolnikov believes he is doing that in killing the pawnbroker and her sister, in a way. There's lots of reasons that he does what he does, and you've begun to wade into those reasons in last week's organization right. But this one is the one that I didn't see enough of. So a lot of people keyed it on the fact that, well, he wants money. Yeah, he's poor. He definitely wants money. Or he's repulsed by her, the pawnbroker. Yes, he is. But why? What is the guiding philosophy that makes him feel emboldened to enact this crime? And it's all about utilitarianism. Remember the tavern conversation that he overhears. The quote here, it's not him, it's one of those people talking that he overhears. They say, this old woman's money, which is going to be sequestered in a monastery somewhere when she dies, it could beget 100, 1,000 good deeds and fresh starts. And Raskolnikov hears that, and he thinks, that's what I thought. I thought, this woman is so evil, but if somebody could just kill her and take her money and distribute it to the poor, Robin Hood style, then the greatest good will be done for the greatest number of people. So he wants her money, but it's not exclusively for his own self-interest. There is a utilitarian inspiration that undergirds it. It's deeply flawed, though, because what does he do when he gets the money? We'll find out. All right, so Raskol actually means split. It's like if you were an English character, they named him Mr. Split. And he is split. He's split right between these two camps, and he's even split within them, unsure of who he is and who he wants to be. He has peasant roots, but his mother and his sisters sacrificed so much to send him off to university so he could learn philosophy, so he could learn law. He could speak French and German, and he can earn respect in these esteemed circles, the westernizer circles, but he struggles to completely believe in those philosophies, which seem to him on one level empty. Yet he knows too much to go back home, or even to figuratively go back home in his thinking, where his friend can do that more freely, and you'll see that when you meet him. So as you move into part 2 and you meet these other characters, I'm curious in your eyes, where do they stand in these philosophies and what do they represent? I am positing that Raskolnikov represents all of them together. How overwhelming is that for him? But thankfully, we don't just have him. We have these other characters. We've got Sonia now, she's sort of floated in between scenes. We have her dad, Marmeladov. We have Dunya. We have her mom, their mom. We have Razumikin, who we'll meet more. We have Luzhin. A couple of these characters you get to know better in the part that you're about to read. And so you might see the creative analysis assignment and go, oh my goodness, I can't do that yet. And you might have to put it off until you've met them. But others you can go ahead and make some conclusions about. Rania Raskolnikov, he's hard to take. He is a difficult character, and we would never make it through this book without foil characters who enrich his life and center him in his mania. Some of those foil characters bring out wonderful things in him. They show us that he is actually a really intelligent and compassionate person. And some of those characters are themselves just so centered and rooted in goodness that we find ourselves relaxing a bit. Others are the opposite, maybe too shrewd or maybe immoral. And so I'm curious what you think. Your creative analysis assignment, no quotes necessary, just a brief few sentences. Who is a contrasting character to Raskolnikov? Serving as his opposition, who challenges him, calls him out, reveals him in a shining or a dark light. Tell us about one such character who serves as his foil, and for a bit of enrichment, what do you already notice about their philosophy? And you can go back to that slide to see if it helps you. Creative analysis. Good luck.